to show me what you're doing, and then let's test it. And that's really one of those things that's the important part. So let me see if I can get a slide change. This is me. That's not important. We'll skip right past that one. When we're talking about IT and IT security, cybersecurity, and privacy, a lot of things that we're talking about is about the threats we deal with every single day. Um, this is just a list of the threats, and I'm sure everyone here recognizes these. You either deal with them every day, you hear about them every day. You might be in cybersecurity or part of the team with cybersecurity, so they talk about these things. But phishing, ransomware, malware, APTs, insider threats, all these different things. These are we're seeing problems. In fact, I was at DEF CON a couple of days. It's not even a week ago now. So I was at DEF CON last week, and I was in an AI presentation. And I do a lot of AI presenting. I do a lot of AI audits and things. But so I went to go as many sessions as I could on AI. And one of the things they talked about was that we need to do AI better. We need to have better security and this and that and whatever. And it was the people who were really big into AI. And they talked about how uh, because of the value of AI, we're going to do it, and we have to make sure we're testing the algorithms, that we're doing the testing the data sets, and we're retesting the data sets, and we're looking at the outcomes, all the normal things you do with AI. But then we have to do all the other things that we should be doing, such as multi-factor access, encrypting the databases, encrypting the transport protocols, all these different things. And I raised my hand and I said, we've been dealing with these cyber issues for 20 some odd years, and we still can't get it right. What makes you think that we're actually going to get it right when we're dealing with AI? And they didn't have an answer for me. They kind of ignored it, which, okay, I understand. About 2 minutes later, one of the guys in the front raises his hand. And he goes, "Hey, can you answer that guy's question back there about doing this better? Because we're seeing the same thing. How do we implement something we keep failing at on something new when the risk, the impact of this thing is so high that if we fail at our jobs, a lot of people get hurt." So when we're talking about these threats, this is stuff that we deal with every single day. And I mean, every one of you, I think, Gene, you said that there was like 100 people on or 90 people or so. So, I mean, all of you should be able to look at that and go, oh yeah, I dealt with that. We got that fish the other day. We had a client that got ransomware. We had a vendor that had a supply chain attack. Everybody has a story. Everyone knows that this stuff is happening. And that's really important, because if you don't know what's happening, then it's really hard to have the next conversation. So
Jonathan,
let's talk a little bit.
we did have a
Yeah,
question come in earlier on. You might cover this later on. If you do, we can skip it for now. But with your involvement and all the experience you have in auditing and controls, what are 3 qualities that you find to be most valuable in the practice and application of audit and controls?
3 qualities of audit and control. That's a good question. I would say, just off the top of my head, um, persistence is one. Persistence to the point of understanding. I think that's a critical aspect of understanding, because when you're dealing with controls, especially in the show me version, you have to be very persistent in dealing with that user to say, okay, tell me more about that. Tell me more about that. Tell me until you get to the very root of the issue, because they will lie to you. Honestly, and it's not that they're lying intentionally; they just may not know. Depending on who you're talking to, they may not have the information. So you've got to kind of work through that. So persistence is really big. Knowledge and wisdom. I think those are the 2 other big ones. Having a lot of knowledge and understanding what needs to happen, but that wisdom is really important in terms of having someone who's got some experience in controls, got some experience in IT and IT security and privacy. Because I mean, I'll tell you the truth. The very first auditor I ever had to deal with, they sent me the list of things. I printed them off. I had a stack of paper back when we used to print things out. And they came in and I was talking to them and they kept asking me questions. and they didn't know what they were asking. And then I had to explain to them the technology they were asking about because they'd never heard of it before. And then I found out this person had been an auditor for 6 months or thereabouts. Right out of college, they had never done it before. They got into the accounting firm. They were doing a financial audit. So that knowledge and wisdom is, and they are two different things, by the way, but those are some really key factors of things that you really have to think about. You got to be persistent in what you're doing. You've got to have the knowledge of what you're doing, but you got to have that wisdom to understand how things work together and how the business works to be able to understand how the controls work. So those probably aren't the greatest answers, just thinking off the top of my head, but hopefully it gives you a little bit of information.
That's great. Thanks, Jonathan.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so let's talk about some table stakes. So when we're talking about table stakes of security, these are the things that everyone should at least have an understanding of and deploy as controls in their organization. Firewalls, simple firewalls. I still get into organizations that don't have firewalls. They don't turn on software firewalls. They don't have core firewalls. They don't have anything. Endpoint protection. It's really hard to not have endpoint protection because if you have any modern Windows, you're going to have Defender, or you're going to have CrowdStrike. You're going to have SentinelOne. You're going to have a variety of things. But I still find them where they don't have endpoint protection, mostly because IT has taken it off. They have removed it intentionally. Patch management and access control, multi-factor authentication, all these things, we talk about it, but I mean, how many people do you know? It looks like we have 132 people in the meeting right now. I want everyone to mentally raise their hand of how many people do you know right now that still doesn't put multi-factor on everything? How many people do you know right now that still doesn't use multi-factor at all? I mean, that's just craziness. Data backup and recovery. Um, this concept of air-gapped backups. I still run into issues where we go in on incident response and I ask them, "Where's your backups?" "Oh, well, it got hit by the ransomware." What do you mean it got hit with the ransomware? You don't have air gapped or immutable or any of those technologies? I mean, having a backup that you send to Iron Mountain where it's completely offline, it's on tape, and it's shipped in a van over, that would have saved millions of dollars for one of my organizations because once the domain admin got compromised, they went in and they deleted the backups because they didn't have this concept of air gap backups. It's just crazy.
Jonathan,
there's yeah,
without beating them up too much, just as you mentioned, the idea that some of these controls are missing, the snowflake incident was all because they didn't have multi-factor authentication in place.
yeah,
So, I mean,
yeah.
absolutely, these controls are not fully implemented. Cliff had a question to add. What about DLP, privacy, credit card, data information controls? Do you have any thoughts about those?
Same thing. I mean, when we talk about privacy, and I'm a big into privacy, about half my certifications are in privacy. And I think I'm going to have to check my number. I am like number 37 in the CDPSE, number 37 in the world. I got it very early on. I'm very proud of that fact. So privacy is big for me because privacy and security go hand in hand to me. If you are allowed to have information, you better secure it. So when we're talking about privacy, PII, or if we're talking about credit card or any of those pieces of information, there's a lot of these controls that we're talking about right here. That's just to protect that data. But then you also have things like the GDPR, CCPA, CPRA that talks about the controls of why you can have data and why you can't have data. And those are critical because if you don't have those, you're going to have data that you're not supposed to have. And then now you're liable. The organization could be liable for that information. In fact, you will be liable, especially if it gets compromised. And there's a lot of different pieces to that. Did that answer your question, Cliff?
Well, I guess what I wanted to, when I look at your list, I fully agree with your list. I just think that was missing from the list. But I think what's really important is I think a lot of organizations look at the list and go, man, there's a lot of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. But I would tell you if I were to look at this thing, I think firewalls would be really near the top for sure. But multi-factor authentication, just about everybody who has major breach gets major embarrassed because they didn't have multi-factor authentication on an important system with sensitive information. So I think I'd like to hear, as you talk about this and the data information protection, I agree these are methods by which to protect that. Your perspective on if I'm sitting in a situation, I'm probably, in most organizations, have weakness at every one of your points, right? There's some weakness.
Sure.
What do you think are the most important to get right first? And how would you kind of maybe, to some degree, you don't have to go through every one, prioritize, say, the top 3 on this list?
Oh, well, okay. So I'll probably have to step back then, because my big thing is if you don't have the data, these become less important. So when we're talking about data privacy and that concept of you shouldn't have the data, depending on what it is, of course, but if you don't have to have the data, then you don't have to implement the controls to protect that data. And so it becomes really difficult because, if you're asking me, like, what is the most important part of this list,
Well, Jonathan,
they
what I'm
are.
hearing is you're telling me number 1 is understand the data that you have and have only what
Yes.
you're supposed to have. Okay,
Yes. I mean, doing a
that's
data
number
inventory.
1. Because if you haven't got that squared away, you're not going to do the next well. Okay, so
Well,
that's number 1.
well,
Now we get into
so
technology. This to me is more technology.
the problem with that is I have yet to go to an organization that actually has a complete data inventory. They might have a data inventory of their workstations and their servers, but they don't have it for their vendors. So I'm still working on many organizations that even have a data inventory, much less the data flow diagram. They'll have network flow diagrams, and that's what people ask for, and that's what they get, but they don't have that data flow diagram. So you can have protections in place to prevent the threat actors. And that's what most of these are going to do, is help prevent those threat actors from getting into your systems. And that might protect it from a security point of view. It doesn't necessarily protect it from a privacy point of view, because that privacy is that different concept of maybe you shouldn't have the data, or you have that right to the data, or you that not right to the data. One of the things that you can, DLP, or the was it NDP in NPD here recently, the 2.9 billion records that was released of the background checks. That's a really good example. We don't know why it was released, or we don't know how it could be compromised yet. That they're still trying to get that out. But we know the attackers got it. I actually found my information in that data breach. It's old information. It's about 20 years old for me. But it was background check information from 20 years ago when I was in the government. So that information got out there. Well, 2.9 billion records is a lot of records. Now, the question is, why did they have all those records? Should they have had all those records? And we have the issue of data privacy may dictate that they shouldn't have had those records, because I'm sure there was GDPR in there and California in there and all these different things. But they did have the records, then they got compromised. So the question is, had they got compromised but didn't have the records, would that have been better? Or if they were going to have the records and they did better security so they wouldn't get compromised, would that have been better? I mean, there's a balance point there, trying to understand, what is better. I would say, one of the things that we talked about at DEF CON when this came out is I think it'd be really interesting to see what would happen if a organization had to pay 1 penny per record to the data subject for every record that they store per month. What would that do? I know this is not part of the presentation, but let's think about that. Let's work through that process. So an organization had to pay 1 penny per month to every data subject that they store the business or store a PII for of some kind. What would happen at the business level? There will be a lot of things. Number one, they would purge records. Let's say they had 500,000 records. That's what is that, $50,000 a month that they would have to pay out, if I'm doing my math right. But that's a lot of money that they have to do every month. that would cause a lot of people to go, well, maybe we don't need to have these records.
At that point,
Or,
your risk exposure just goes to the moon. I mean, you're exactly
oh,
right.
absolutely.
They would do more. I mean, we would do better at that point if it was that punitive.
I would hope so. But let's look at it from the other side. If you as an individual started receiving pennies in the mail, I mean, your mailman may hate it because they're going to be hauling around pennies all day long. But if you started receiving, let's say you received $300 per month because you got that many pennies, what would that make you feel?
It would make you
I
feel
mean,
exposed, I think, because you'd realize how much your data is exposed, and unfortunately, that's the truth of it, more likely than not.
it is. In fact, now most of us realize our data is out there, is exposed in some way. People have it, but now we have organizations that are not implementing these controls that have that data. Now, the reason why they don't implement them because they're expensive, or because they're difficult, or because someone has an emotional attachment for not doing multi-factor, or whatever the case is. So, I mean, this ties right back into we are as auditors when we're auditing people we are going in and we're evaluating their controls, right? But why are we doing that? Is it doing it because we're doing it as a job, or are we doing it because we know that if they don't have these controls, the basic controls I have up on the screen, which is truly just a basic list, but if they're not even doing these things, do you think they're doing the privacy controls right? Do you think they're doing DLP right? Do you think they're doing data inventory correctly? So, I mean, this is table stakes, back to table stakes of cybersecurity. If you're not even doing these things, I can't imagine an organization that would be doing privacy controls, correctly or right. So that's it's a really good question, Cliff, and I think it leads really well into what we are doing when we go in and we're testing our IT controls at organizations, because we want to make sure that those organizations are implementing these controls and they're protecting people's data. If you go back to any presentation I've ever done, I would say almost any, lots of them on YouTube, lots of them out there in the world, I will probably at some point say our job is to protect people. And that's what I truly believe. So when I'm going in and asking questions to an organization, I'm thinking about, are you actually protecting people's data? Are you protecting those people? So when I ask about firewalls, endpoint protection, multi-factor authentication, network monitoring, all this, it's really about, are they doing the right things? Now, the question comes into is, if I say, hey, do you have firewalls deployed? Yes, great. Show me. And that's really what we're kind of getting into is we want them to verify their controls, not just tell us they're doing it. And we do a verification from a very specific process. But let me get through the next couple of slides real quick. These are some information I put into this presentation, well, when I started doing this presentation. If you think about it, 2004 was Windows XP Service Pack 2. If you remember back, before 2004, specifically SPAC 2, we didn't have default firewalls on our Windows. We had a firewall on Windows XP, but it wasn't turned on by default. But Windows XP on SPAC 2 turned it on by default. I still go into organizations and I have them show me the screen of their Windows firewall and it's disabled. It's been 20 years of having Windows Firewall on by default, and we still can't get people to turn on host-based firewalls. Let's look at first data breach of over 1 million records was in 2005. That's a lot of records back then. And then of course we had the one recently, 2.9 billion. So I mean, we have escalated our data breach significantly. Let's see, the first next gen firewall was 2008. So what we consider next generation firewall, and that's really just having a little bit more decision making in the firewall rules of what can do in terms of application level filtering and stuff. But the one down here, 2010, that was MFA on phones for Google Authenticator. So we've had Google Authenticator, an easy way to do